Good evening, everyone. Welcome back. Today is October 19th, 2015, and you're watching Veterans Voices, a monthly talk show focusing on your issues, veterans issues. I'm your host, Nathan Johnson, and I'm joined again by my co-host, Kevin Graves. Tonight's episode is a very special episode. Tonight, we honor the Vietnam veterans through our Veterans Voices Vietnam special. It's been 50 years since the war in Vietnam started, and 40 years since its end. Our focus tonight is on the Vietnam veteran, the story of transition, the lives they went on to lead, and what present and future generation warfighters like me can learn from these mentors, from their experience through these men and women in their lives in Vietnam.
Stay tuned as we share stories of not only being in Vietnam, but what it was like coming home all those years ago. We will also discuss the healing journeys made back into Vietnam by the men who fought the war. And as always, we want to hear your voice tonight, whether you're a veteran or a family member. Did you serve in the Vietnam War? If so, when were you there and who did you serve with?
We hope to have a lot of people call in. We want to hear about your experiences. If you're a Vietnam veteran or a family member, please call in, use the live chat or the email, and send us your information.
We are first joined by Steve Burchek, Vietnam veteran, photographer, and author of Compass and a Camera, A Year in Vietnam. Welcome to the show, Steve.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, Steve, thanks for being here. You've actually made quite a presence here locally in the community recently. You joined Vietnam vets at Diablo Valley, you had mentioned earlier in the conversation. But your art, you're a photographer, and so Compass and a Camera is a visual capturing of your experience in Vietnam. Tell us a little bit about when you served in Vietnam and where did you serve?
I was in Vietnam June 1968 to June 69. Served as a sergeant forward observer with the 1st Infantry Division. I was a forward observer in a mortar platoon.
Tell us a little bit more about the role of a forward observer. What is the day-to-day job of a forward observer, and why is that an important job?
My job was to use a map and a compass and a radio and have fires pre-plotted if we were going out on patrol or setting up an ambush. And it was very important to know where we were at any point in time. So if we got hit or blew the ambush, we could call in support from either mortar fire from our own company or artillery fire from another unit.
And did you consider yourself an amateur photographer at that point, or what was it that made you decide to start taking pictures and to document what you were doing over there?
I was an amateur photographer. I brought a simple rangefinder camera with me, but I thought this was going to be a pretty unique experience, and it was. So a couple times a month, I'd ask permission to bring the camera with me, and I would shoot 10 rolls of film, some color, some black and white, and sent the color film home to be processed, and those I didn't see the slides until I got back.
Now, I think it's very interesting, Steve. The opportunity for us to have this conversation is one in which I kind of reflect on that, not a lot of the country really appreciated the Vietnam War or the warrior during the time in the 60s and 70s. And so I think a lot has been learned about the Vietnam veteran themselves. We've learned to respect and appreciate their service and thank them for their service. But I think that a lot was actually missed or overlooked during the Vietnam War in regards to where we were and what it was like in the jungles of Vietnam, and if it in fact was all jungle or not. And you really walked a lot of the countryside. I imagine as a forward observer, everywhere you went, you were walking around, maybe very rarely had a helicopter ride or a truck ride or something. So tell us a little bit about your experience in Vietnam, maybe a little bit about when you first arrived there.
When I first arrived there, that was one of the most memorable days of my life. The plane flew in from Hawaii with a stop at Clark Air Base. We landed at Bien Hoa. We get out. It's hot and humid, about 4 in the afternoon. The heat and the humidity really hit you. We got on buses, same Army buses you'd see at any base in the States, except they had wire cages welded on all the windows. And we asked what those were for, and they quickly told us so Viet Cong don't throw grenades into the buses. So we headed from Bien Hoa Air Base to Long Binh, and the smell of the country struck me. It was very warm and damp, especially as we got near some of the villages. Sanitation systems were pretty primitive, so it was a big shock.
So this was your first experience in a foreign country. I mean, these were new smells, new sights, and the fact of someone throwing a grenade into a bus was kind of a new reality for you. I would imagine quite a culture shock and reality shock that was different from the United States. And how old were you at this point?
I think I was about 22 at this point.
22, yeah, very young. Were you drafted or did you enlist into the Army? Or?
I enlisted. I'd been in college, left college, and my deferment ended, and I was about to get drafted anyway, so I enlisted.
Now, it was kind of a unique experience for you to be able to take pictures, am I correct? I mean, most of the time it was, you were told that you were not, most of those that served were said, no cameras allowed, correct?
I don't know about other units, but our unit never really, I don't remember a specific rule, but I did ask the lieutenant about a month after I was there if it was okay, and he says, as long as you can do your job. So obviously, while we were on patrol, I was carrying my weapon and we were focused on what was going on, but either if we had a short helicopter ride dropping us off, I would shoot pictures in the air, or every hour we took a 5-minute break and I would shoot pictures of the guys around me.
So you got an opportunity to capture a lot of the local culture, some of the villagers. There's a tremendous amount of very unique photographs in this book.
Yeah, when we got to November, December, January of end of '68, beginning of '69, it was a year after the Big Tet. So we spent a lot of time in pacification projects in villages, and we would surround a village and spend 4 or 5 hours there. So in those cases, I was given permission once again to take half an hour and shoot pictures. Villagers are relatively friendly and didn't mind their picture being taken.
Probably even a little excited by the sight of a camera and not knowing where this picture would end up. Tell us a little bit about how your interactions with the Vietnam locals in these villages, how did it go? Were they very friendly and engaging and curious and interested in you, and were you as interested and curious about them, or was it very much kind of a standoff approach to interacting with the locals?
You have to understand the area I was in. I was northeast of Saigon in 3 Corps.
Okay.
I Corps, 1 Corps was closer to North Vietnam. So we had a heavy presence of U.S. Army and South Vietnamese troops. So the villagers generally felt more secure, and I think that's why they were friendlier. Further north, that wouldn't have been the case.
More in a little bit. Our producers recently had the chance to interview Frances Nguyen from Southern California. Frances was a Vietnamese refugee who was only 12 years old when her family fled Saigon. We'll now share this fascinating story with you and return in a moment.
As you know, day back before 1975, the fall of Saigon, and I live near Saigon. I go to school in Saigon. The month of April is very crazy. Like nobody know what to do. As a civilians, we only hope for the best. We only hope that nothing gonna happen. We never thought that we would have to leave our country, Vietnam. By the end of April, we see people, the North Communist people, government soldiers are still moving in, and everybody, for us, certain Vietnamese people trying to get out. But as for us, our family, we have no way to get out because we have no connection with the government or anything like that. Well, my brother was in a Vietnamese Navy, but he has no connection either. He can only tell us, be ready if anything comes. So on the April 29, he told us to go to the harbor in Saigon and just wait. To see if there any ship leaving, then we can get on it and just leave. So he came to us, drove us to the harbor. While we were going there was still fighting on the street, shooting. People were dead, dead body all over the places. There were barricades everywhere. There was shooting. There was raining. It just chaos. Leaving Vietnam in 1975 was all luck that we went to our harbor, and it happened to step on a big Navy ship, a Vietnamese Navy ship, and we got on and just left. And as you can imagine, there was a lot of people that were trying to climb on the ship. It was kicked off because the ship was so full, and it was shooting everywhere. And the next day, April 30th, we were on the ship, and then we heard the Vietnamese government say we are surrender. So everybody was crying. How could it happen so fast? So then we were on sea for like a week or two. Then we came to Philippines, where American ship was waiting for us. And my mom said, so let's go to California. So we chose California. And then we end up in Camp Pendleton. We stayed there for 2 months to learn English, to wait for a sponsor, and then to get ready for a new life. I would like to take this opportunity to thank all of the American soldiers that were in Vietnam during those times that support us, that fight for us against communism, for all they've done for sacrificing their life, their future, their livelihood, their youth, for serving in Vietnam. And I really always remember that.
Welcome back. If you're just tuning in, welcome to the Veterans Voices Vietnam Special. A fantastic opportunity. We have some very special guests, Vietnam veterans on the stage tonight to talk about their experiences. Over 40, 50 years ago, these gentlemen served in Vietnam. Local author and photographer Steve Burchick is still with us. Steve, we just watched a very descriptive interview with Frances Nguyen, who was a refugee in Vietnam and fled in 1975, some years after you were there, and she was kind of talking about some of the horrors of war. I think some of the stuff that we see in movies and maybe we were familiar with, but she experienced it firsthand. And I know we're not here to necessarily talk about all the combat that you went through, but certainly combat is a piece of the experience for the soldier and for the locals. How is it that you, having served in Vietnam as a forward observer, how is it that you adapted to being in Vietnam, this new environment, but also the idea that people are actually out there trying to kill you?
I, like most soldiers, had a fair amount of training in the States first, so I had some preparation for it. Basically, we were alert 24 hours a day. We were just paying attention all the time. Further north, they were dealing with larger units, company size and larger battalion. In our area, it was pretty much the classic guerrilla warfare. We'd be going along on a search and destroy patrol during the day, and suddenly we'd be fired on, fire back. Most contacts lasted 10 minutes or less. If there was an ambush at night, we'd be sitting there all night. Somebody would be moving, we'd start firing, they'd fire at us. Within 5 minutes, they disappeared. Half the time we didn't find a blood trail. We find a blood trail, but no bodies. It was kind of scary, but I managed to get through it.
Well, we're glad that you did. And so, Kevin, we were talking a little bit while we were watching that video. We were interested in how you've shared some of these experiences with people, and there's a little bit of a story to the letters that you were writing home.
We know how you got the pictures. Share with us a little bit about how you got the text.
The text of the book, actually, I got to go back for a minute. There was a high school English teacher. Her name is Arlene Addison, and I hadn't talked about Vietnam for more than 40 years. She asked me to come in. She knew I was a veteran, asked me to come in and talk to her class. So I showed a few of the slides and pictures. A couple days later, she gives me a folder with 60 letters in it from the kids. That was an amazing experience. 2 weeks later, somebody else asked me to talk. I showed some of the same pictures at the end. Somebody said, "Why don't you write a book?" I talked to my wife and I said, "Do you have those letters I sent you?" I'd sent her a letter every day. She had saved them. They were in shoe boxes in the closet. I pulled the letters out. So I had a daily recap of what I was doing, and I had pictures to match up with it. It made writing the book a little easier, although it still took a year to finish.
Very good. That's a great story. And I guess she was your fiance at the time, I believe. Is that correct?
She was, and we'd agreed to wait till I got back, see if I still was okay. And we got married after I got back.
Well, Compass and a Camera, a book written by Steve Burchick, and I also want to invite our audience to visit the County Administration Building at 651 Pine Street, where an entire art gallery of Steve Burchick's work, his experiences in Vietnam, are available on display through November 18th. And you'll have a chance to meet Steve at our Veterans Day ceremony on Tuesday, November 10th at the Board Chambers at 11 a.m. Steve, I want to thank you for joining us tonight. Really an honor to have you on the stage.
Thank you for joining us and sharing your experience, Steve. We recently caught up with Vietnam veterans of Diablo Valley and asked them to recall what it was like returning home from Vietnam. These are their stories.
Hi, I'm Lindsay Rousseau with Veterans Voices, and we're here at the Veterans Memorial Building in Danville, where we caught up with the Vietnam veterans of Diablo Valley. This organization is comprised of veterans from all branches of the armed forces who served in the Vietnam conflict. We came to hear their personal stories and what it was like transitioning back to civilian life. They also had some great insights into the similarities and differences experienced by Iraq and Afghanistan veterans returning home. These are their stories. What was it like coming back?
Well, the reception from family and friends was warm and good. But there was a very pleasant atmosphere in the public at large about Vietnam. After my tour in Antarctica, I had shore duty in Monterey. And that was kind of a Berkeley Junior, you might say, and kind of a hotbed of anti-war folks. And driving down the street in uniform and having some teenager running after the car screaming, "Murderer, murderer." Not a fun experience.
When I first got back, and even for the next 30 years, I never really told anybody I was a Vietnam veteran unless they asked me. I never talked about the war. I never told anybody about it. When I got back, my family, it was just like I had been gone to school and came back home from school. I mean, there was no questions about what I did or how I felt or anything. It was not like, you know, kind of welcome home or anything like that. And that's part of the looking glass experience that I had when I went to Vietnam. All of the rules that I had been raised with for 25 years, they're no good anymore. Right. You can't not kill people. That's what you're sent there for, to kill people.
When I got back from Nam, the first 30 days at home wasn't easy. It was extremely hard. I was not ready to be released into the public. I should have been thrown in jail a couple of times for violent actions. You had a chip on your shoulder when you got back. Okay, that's the best way I can put it. Then they sent me up to Fort Lewis, and I did 6 more months. And those 6 months eased me back into civilian life, because I lived off base with my wife. So it made it a lot easier to ease your way back in. But those first 30 days, that 30-day leave, you got to realize, I got off the plane at 5:30 in the morning. By 11:30 that morning, I was on a commercial flight going to San Francisco to meet my wife. I was out for 30 days of leave. You know, so you really went right from Nam to home for dinner, babe. Yeah. You know, and that is, I don't think that's the way it should be. It really shouldn't. You've got to give the guy some downtime. Okay? You can't just throw him back into the public. You know, I wasn't ready for it, and I'm sure other guys weren't.
But I did experience, boy, tough word for trying to find, maybe shunning of us. My close friends were supportive of me. The girlfriend I had when I left didn't want to have anything to do with me. She was anti-war then, by that time, and she felt that I was wrong. I shouldn't have joined the service. And then I started college about 4 months after I got out. And pretty much people wouldn't have anything to do with you. So I tried to grow my hair as long as I could, as quickly as you could. I mean, your hair only grows so fast, but got it into a ponytail, and so I could blend in with everybody else back then, and just didn't say anything about the fact that I was a veteran.
Mm-hmm. I do recall during, I think it was my first or second tour, one day you're in Vietnam or in Da Nang, and a day later you're in downtown San Diego. going to a bar or going out. And that's a 180-degree flip from where you were mentally and physically. And the thing that I think of now most about that is the young warriors that are doing it today 4, 5, 6 times and having to come home and readjust every time. And you know, I have such a deep appreciation for their service and what they are currently doing, and for their families too. It's got to be, you know, far more traumatic than anything we ever did in Vietnam.
Welcome back to Veterans Voices. I want to invite everyone to, again, call in, share your experiences. We want to know if you served in Vietnam, when you were there, where did you serve? We've got a few comments already. We had a respondent say that it's a great show on Vietnam, and I agree. That's a great opportunity to honor our Vietnam veterans, not only in Contra Costa County, but our Vietnam veterans throughout the nation. We're now joined by Jim Townsend, a good friend of mine, commandant, of the Marine Corps League, the local detachment here, but very distinguishably a Silver Star recipient. Jim, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Nathan.
It's an honor to have you here, and we were going to have your wife Libby on the show, but she's under the weather. And what's remarkable about your wife, Libby, other than she's your wife, Jim?
She spent 2 years in Vietnam flying the R&R flights from Vietnam to Australia. And her experience were, when they were going to Australia, the exuberance of the soldiers going to Australia and how deadbeat they were coming home.
Now, she claims to have more time in Vietnam than you. Is that true, Jim?
Not hours.
More trips, though, huh?
More
days.
trips, yes.
Got it. Very good. Well, Jim, this is a special opportunity tonight because you've been home from Vietnam for 48 years.
48 years.
And your service there is very remarkable, but yet you have never shared your experience in Vietnam with anyone.
My experience in Vietnam, there was just no reason to explain my experience. I belong to the Marine Corps League, but we do not talk about our experiences in World War II, Korea, Vietnam, and the wars that have followed since.
It's hard to.
It's very hard to.
Yeah.
We all respect that we all fought in the wars, but there are some funny stories that come out of it, but that's about it.
Well, we appreciate your courage and your willingness to come on the show tonight to talk a little bit about your experience, and we invite you to share with the public what you think was the important experiences you had there, and maybe what lessons we can learn for the future.
Well, what I feel is that was important is the camaraderie that I had with my men, and I still am in touch with about 4 of them. We get together, we try to get together once a year. We've kept this alive for 50 years. It's been something very special to me. But besides those 4 guys, I really don't stay in touch with too many.
Well, tell us a little bit about your role in Vietnam. What did you do there, Jim?
I was a squad leader for the 1st Battalion, 5th Marines, a infantry outfit. We started off in Chu Lai, which was a little bit, about 12 miles north of Chu Lai, on a hill called Hill 54 in September of '66. January of '67, we got sent into the Quay Son Valley to set up a base there to stop the 2nd Infantry Division of the North Vietnamese Regular Army. And we stayed there until I was wounded in September of '67.
Well, lots more to talk about, and we're just cracking the nut, basically. But we've got Libby on the phone. Libby has called into the show.
Hello?
Libby, thank you for joining us tonight. Again, this is to remind our audience, this is Jim's wife, and who says she has more experience in Vietnam than her husband. Jim,
Good
welcome.
evening, Libby.
Hello?
Hello, Libby. Welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us. How are you?
I'm feeling a lot better. I'm just very sorry that I didn't get over there tonight. But I just want to say, as a flight attendant, I flew my brother, who was a combat engineer, first lieutenant, over to Okinawa in 1967. Unfortunately, 6 weeks after he was there, he was wounded. So my focus after his return was mainly on him. However, I will tell you that when the troops were coming home, especially if we were not landing at Travis Air Force Base and coming into Oakland, the exuberance the troops experienced flying over San Francisco, the Golden Gate Bridge, and turning around and coming into Oakland, it was just, it made you cry. But the sad part about that is that at the end of block time, there was no homecoming crowd there or welcome home or appreciation of your service. Because to those guys, they went over there and fought just as hard as in precedent wars, and they deserve to be appreciated. So I certainly have always respected the military, and being a Cal graduate in 1967, it was like a tug of war when I first started, having friends at Berkeley against the war, and then flying with the troops over there to serve our country. And they were doing, it was my country, right or wrong, my country. And I want to thank you, Nathan, and your staff for all that you do for the vets of Contra Costa County. I think it's absolutely fantastic. And you've certainly helped my husband and me get through some of this post-traumatic stuff that shows up years later.
Well, thank you, Libby, for joining us tonight.
To say.
Yeah, we're very sorry that you couldn't join us in person, but we appreciate that you called in. And so Libby was talking a little bit about the flight back home, and let's talk a little bit about the days leading up to leaving Vietnam and getting on that plane and coming home.
Well, I was medevaced.
Oh, you were injured, of course, you mentioned.
I was medevaced, and I was sent to Travis, and then went to Oakdale Naval Hospital for 3 months.
How were you injured, Jim?
I was hit with a grenade.
Okay.
In my stomach and leg area.
Wow, wow. Lucky to be alive.
Lucky to be alive.
Yeah. And so so someone saved your life and pulled you onto a helicopter, and you were out of there in a couple of days afterwards?
I was medevaced out that morning to Da Nang. I only had 10 days left to serve in country before my duty was up, and not to be rotated home. But then I went, after about 4 or 5 days, they stabilized me. They sent me down to Oak Knoll.
Now, was this the event in which you received the Silver Star?
I received the Silver Star in a battle that took place 2 days before.
2 days before that. Wow. I know that there's very few Silver Star recipients, and we thank you for your heroism, sir.
Well,
and the fact that you were wounded and survived that as well. And so your flight home was a little bit different than the other flights.
My flight home was a long one because we were all on stretchers, and on a C-130, I think. And but the funny thing is, I landed at Travis 1 hour before I left Vietnam because of the international date line.
Sure. Wow.
Yeah.
So what's made it so hard? I know there's this little bit of kind of stand-to mentality in the Marine Corps League and in other veterans organizations, and maybe even kind of a generational thing. But what is so hard personally for yourself to talk about these experiences or share these experiences with others?
Well, only other vets know what you went through.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And there's no really reason to talk about it. The country should talk about it, but we don't. And I just have strong bonds with the people that I associate with at the Marine Corps League and with your organization and with the VA, because I get excellent care since I got involved, and it's helped me. I do have a PTSD problem, but your office and the VA here in Martinez have totally gotten me under control.
Do you find that a lot of that comes from talking with other vets?
We have.
Isn't that the way it works?
I meet in a group once a month at the Vet Center in Concord.
Right.
Sal is my counselor. He's a great man, and he's helped me out a lot. And the group itself.
And you would encourage other veterans who have been hesitant to reach out.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
because I'm 69, and I'm still having the memories. But the group to meet once a month and just to talk about it, have some fun, it really, really helps.
Well, that's great.
Well, Jim, I feel like we could have you on this show for an entire episode. And I know that there's a lot of you've experienced, and I know that you've just shared not even a blip with us tonight. And we appreciate your bravery, sir, not only in your service in Vietnam, but your bravery tonight to get on the stage in front of an audience and to tell us, to identify yourself as a Vietnam veteran and as a Purple Heart recipient and Silver Star recipient. So very thankful for both you and your wife, Libby, joining us tonight and sharing your experience about Vietnam.
I appreciate it, Nathan. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you again for Jim for sharing your story tonight. And we previously recorded an interview with Jana Hone from Maui. Jana volunteers for the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund and is working hard to find photos for every service member listed on the Vietnam Memorial Wall in Washington, D.C. There are still 45 photos missing just from Contra Costa County alone. 45 service members out there who were killed in action, and Jana is looking for their faces, photos of them. So stay tuned and learn how you can help.
The Faces Never Forgotten program started approximately 10 years ago, and the people, the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund, who built the Vietnam Wall in Washington, D.C., decided that we needed an education center to go along with the wall. And as you know, it takes a long time to get museums through Congress and that type of thing, but we finally got the okay, and they're working on raising the money to build it now, and we're hoping within the next 2 years to break ground. So what they decided to do was put a face with each name. We've just gone over the 43,000 mark of submitted photos for the Faces Never Forgotten program, and so we're down to about 16,000 photos that we need. There was 58,307 photos is what we need. The website is very simple. If you just type in Wall of Faces or Faces Never Forgotten, the website will come up. And within that website, you will see a search box. And your viewers can type a name in, and it does have to be his birth name. It can't be a nickname. Okay. And as soon as they type that in, his profile should come up. My entire high school years was Vietnam. Every day, there was something about Vietnam. And by the time I graduated, the Vietnam War was ending. The men were coming home. And I recall the reception that they received upon their coming home. And it has always bothered me that they were not treated properly. And it's always really stayed with me. I've always had a huge place in my heart for Vietnam vets because I really felt badly about how they were treated. You know, it's a very emotional project, but it's so important. We are losing family members as we speak, and we truly need to find these photos before they cannot be found anymore. It's just such an honor for me to be a part of this, and I think I get more out of this than what I give. Every time one of those photos comes in, it's just, so touches my heart.
Welcome back. If you're just tuning in tonight, this is the Veterans Voices Vietnam Special. We invite you to call in, email, or send us a chat and share your own personal experiences tonight. In fact, we've gotten a few chats already, so I'll address them right here on the screen. Someone says they heard that there's a Vietnam Veterans display that will be at the Veterans Memorial Building on Veterans Day in November. Now, that's November 11th. Do we know anything about this exhibit, and is it free and open to the public? I know it's free. I know it's open to the public. They're at 400 Harts Avenue, and in fact, we're going to talk about it in our resources at the end of the show. Our second chat question here is actually a comment. It says, wow, what a great video interview of the Vietnam veterans. Is there more? I think we've shown an edited version, and our production team will probably work towards showing a full-length segment of the Vietnam veterans of Diablo Valley interviews that we showed previously in the show. So be sure to tune in to CCTV on a regular basis, and we'll show more footage of Vietnam veteran stories for you.
We are now joined by two gentlemen who have recently returned to Vietnam after serving there many years ago. Welcome, Mike Weber and John Giannini.
Hi.
Thank you, gentlemen. Tell us a little bit about yourselves in regards to your service in the military.
Well, myself, I was in the Army in 1967-68. I served as an Army medic, primarily in MASH units and in transportation of wounded, all through 67-68.
John?
I was in the Army from June 1968 to May 1971. And during the first part of my time in the Army, I was trained as a linguist and interrogator. And so when I went to Vietnam, I knew Vietnamese people. I knew about the country. I spoke the language. I was a little more, it was less of a shock for me than it was for a lot of people. So I did the first tour, got sent back to the States, and immediately got sent back, almost immediately sent back for the second tour.
Wow.
And fortunately, during the first tour, I didn't work all the time as a field interrogator in the 11th Cav. I was pulled out of that job because of my photographic experience. That was my education. So I became a combat photographer for the 11th Armored Cav, which was sort of like this great hitchhiking trip with helicopters and airplanes and tanks. And so I got to move around a lot and to see a lot.
So your experiences almost overlapped then. You were there, Mike, 67, 68, yeah. John, 68, 69 through 71.
Well, I wound up in country in March 69.
Okay.
And I was there until March 70. In fact, the day I left was, I think, March 17th, which was when Sihanouk was overthrown in Cambodia.
So wow, so 47, 48 years ago. It's been a while, gentlemen, and for you both, it was maybe several decades before you finally went back. And when you went back, similar to Kevin in his recent trip to Iraq, you were back there in a civilian capacity, right? You weren't back there wearing a uniform or fighting for the Army still. You were back there as veterans, is that correct?
Actually, I went back in 1973.
Okay.
Because I was a photojournalist, and
okay.
I was living in Paris and covered the Paris peace talks. So I was there when they signed the Paris Accords.
Okay. Wow.
So once the Paris Accords were signed, I had the feeling that everything would fall apart actually a good deal faster than it actually did. So I went back and went mostly to Cambodia, but I was sort of hopping back and forth between Cambodia, Vietnam, and Laos. And then actually in Cambodia, I got what we used to refer to in the military as the $1 million wound. It's the one that doesn't screw you up or disable you, but gives you disability for life. But I got the $1 million wound as a civilian and couldn't collect.
Yeah.
Understood. And Mike, you've made a couple trips back to Vietnam. Share with us what your experience has been and why you made those trips.
Well, very fortunate for me, I was invited to go in 2003 by David Baring of the Wheelchair Foundation. And he just put it out there to our Vietnam Veterans Group and says, we've got a small group going and we can handle more people. Does anybody want to come along? And it was a fairly affordable thing at the time. And so I happily jumped on board, and I was the only Vietnam vet that went on that trip. But the purpose there was to distribute wheelchairs to Vietnamese. And throughout that trip, I just really enjoyed myself. I stood out as a veteran, and lots of experiences where the Vietnamese people, and I wore an American flag on my hat, so I was obviously an American. But a number of times Vietnamese would approach me and just kind of touch me or whatnot, and smile at me. They could tell. I mean, they knew that I was a veteran. I remember an old lady in Saigon, it was really hot, and I'm sweating on the sidewalk and just kind of waiting for this distribution to start. And this little old woman brought me a bottle of water and handed it to me. And I thought she's going to want to be paid. And I started, finding payment for her. Oh no, she wouldn't take any of it. And she also, reached out and touched me a little bit just on the arm, and then walked away. So I really felt appreciated. And by certain individuals anyway, and I felt known. I felt like I was a known quantity to them, and it was really heartening to me.
And that led to a second trip?
When I got back from that trip, I then was president of Vietnam Veterans of Diablo Valley, and I was so buoyed by the first trip that we made it a mission of the Vietnam Vets of Diablo Valley to raise funds and get enough capital together to buy wheelchairs and to do another trip. And it took us a couple of years to raise enough money, but we raised enough money for 560, I think it was, wow, wheelchairs to redistribute in 2006. And in that trip, I think we took 14 people from locals, Vietnam Vets of Diablo Valley members and their spouses. And that was just a fabulous, fabulous trip. In that venture, we adopted orphanages. So every place that we went, we had an orphanage or some kind of a charitable entity that we targeted. And we raised money specific for the wheelchairs, but we also raised money specific for these orphanages and these the charities that we were going to support. And it was funny because we kept asking, how do we get this money over there? And what we ended up doing is we smuggled it in cash. And just through our resources, people had told us that greenbacks are the best. So we designated certain people to carry certain amounts of cash. And so whoever carried the cash through customs and whatnot got to be our spearhead into that charity and interact with those people. And it was just as rewarding as it could possibly be.
That's great. And John, you've had many trips over with a different mission. Share with us what your mission has been over the last couple of decades.
I mean, over the years, I was living in China working for the French news agency, Agence France Presse. I got to be, as a consequence of that, I got to be quite close to some of the Vietnamese diplomats who were incredibly lonely guys in Beijing because the Chinese hated them. And so I'd have them over for coffee and lunch and things like that. And so we developed a relationship, and I was able to go back in 1988 and travel from the Chinese border to the Cambodian border down the entire length of the country. And over the years, I've done similar trips to that and gone back regularly and seen the changes in Vietnam and the changes in the people and the infrastructure and the whole thing. And it's funny, the first time I was back, they were so unused to seeing any Americans that they wouldn't believe I was an American. I was in Haiphong Harbor watching these guys load scrap onto a freighter, and it was war scrap that was being loaded onto the freighter. And these guys asked me, what nationality I was, and at that time they only saw Soviets, and so I explained to them that I was an American. And I explained it to them in Vietnamese, and they couldn't believe I spoke the language, and second, they couldn't believe I was an American. So I was explaining all this to them, and then finally I pulled out my passport and showed them my American passport, and they looked at it, and then they said, "Nah, Lin So," which means Soviet. So that was the first visit, but I've made many trips since.
How long ago was your last visit there, John?
I was invited by the Vietnamese Foreign Ministry, along with a group of other former correspondents in Vietnam, to attend the 40th anniversary ceremonies of the fall of Saigon. Of course, they call it the Liberation Day, and So I was there actually filming the parade for the PBS NewsHour program that night.
So, gentlemen, let me ask you. I'm going to include you in this too, Kevin, okay? Because I haven't been back to Iraq. I was there 12 years ago, and I've often thought about it and reflected on it, and nowhere near would I go to Iraq today. And it took you 35 years or 36 years for you to get there, Mike, so I've got some time. But I really want to know about what the experience was like when you're on that flight back, or even when you're boarding the plane or offloading the plane, and you're stepping foot into that country. What do you feel? What do you sense, physically or emotionally, when this is happening for you? When you're going back to a place that you were 36 years ago, or back to a place you've been to many times, either as a soldier or as a civilian, or you're going to the place where your son served. What's it like?
Well, for me, it was a combination of exuberance and anxiousness and a little bit of fear. Along that, it was all kinds of emotions trickling in. And what helped me really was that I was going with David Bering, and he wanted me along to help him. So I was kind of carrying his water a little bit. Yeah. And interpreting things for him, and he had lots of questions. He's a real avid history buff, and so all of his questioning of me was therapeutic for me, because I give him the answer and I listen to my own answers, and it helped me to just kind of get directional into the end of the whole trip.
So being there with a purpose helped out.
Yeah, oh, entirely. Definitely.
John?
Well, I think the purpose part of it is very useful. I mean, all my trips into Vietnam have all essentially been journalistic endeavors. And so I had a mission. I had something to do. I think from an emotional point of view, probably a year and a half ago when Mike Saray and I went in and we shot some stuff for PBS, about the Agent Orange and unexploded ordnance, and the terrible problem of those two things in Vietnam, this leftover remnants of war that just affects people, 3 generations on. Yeah. And there were I think the interview that I did with Colonel Hong, who was a North Vietnamese soldier who stayed in the Army and became a colonel and runs the teams of mine removal specialists. And so we were working with them in Quang Tri, and meeting Colonel Hong, I think, was probably one of the most emotional things for me.
Well, thank you, John. Thank you, Mike. Kevin.
Appreciate your time, as always. It's always our time on stage seems too short.
Way too short.
I do appreciate, I can kind of relate to the healing process that occurs through this, though, and having a mission definitely gives you a purpose to be there. Definitely appreciate that.
Thanks again, Mike and John, and thank you for your service to the country, and thank you for joining us here tonight. We now have a video produced by PBS correspondent Mike Saray, and Mike served in Vietnam, and reports from Da Nang on Americans who have returned to Vietnam in hopes of making a difference.
And John was actually the cameraman on this, and we didn't find that out till tonight, so that's an interesting connection.
Thank you.
As the first major American combat unit deployed to Vietnam in 1965, the 9th Marine Expeditionary Brigade landed in Da Nang. The Marines landed with only their packs on their backs, on a limited mission to protect the strategic airbase in Da Nang. The landing was deceptively quick and peaceful. These Marines soon became part of one of the longest and most bitterly contested military campaigns in American history, which would span 2 decades. 50 years later, Da Nang's beaches are a popular resort destination for the Vietnamese and foreigners. It's also home for a handful of Vietnam veterans who came back here to live and work on one of the most dangerous legacies of the war, which the Vietnamese referred to as the American War.
My name is Chuck Palazzo. The first time I came to Vietnam was in 1970 during the war. I was a U.S. Marine. I had just turned 18 years old. and I found myself 8,000 miles away from my home turf of New York. I did have a goal and a dream to come back here at some point and do something positive here in Vietnam and for the Vietnamese people.
I'm Manus Campbell. I'm from New Jersey. I'm a former Marine. I served in Vietnam in 1967 and 68. I moved to Vietnam in 2010. And my organization funds education for disabled children and for victims of unexploded ordnance.
So we'll be north of Charlie Ridge then, right? Okay.
Okay.
I'm Mike Saray, and like the others, I first came to Vietnam during the war. In 1970 and 71, I was with the Marines, flying as a forward air observer out of the Da Nang Air Base.
Many of the Agent Orange missions took off and landed at the air base, and much of Agent Orange was stored at the air base for about 10 years. Much of the area right around the perimeter of what is now the airport was contaminated as a result of that.
Agent Orange, the defoliant used extensively by the American military during the war, contains dioxin, a dangerous compound believed to cause birth defects and cancers in Vietnamese families and American veterans.
Well, the older boy who's laying here, he's just about incapacitated 100% at this point. We're seeing more and more of the genetic results of Agent Orange. These two boys are third-generation victims, and I see it in our own veterans' families back in the U.S. The problems have been skipping generations. Grandchildren and now great-grandchildren are being born with problems as a result of the genetic issue with Agent Orange.
After a 30-year career as a software developer, a recent divorce, and a long struggle with post-traumatic stress syndrome, Chuck sold his house and most of his possessions and moved to Da Nang to start a software company so he could work with a local Vietnamese organization assisting Agent Orange victims.
One of my motivations back then, 4 or 5 years ago, was to resolve my own issues as well as to work with the victims. I continue to heal as a result of the work that we do with the Agent Orange victims here. I have no medical or scientific background, but just interacting with the kids, I could see that it makes them happy, and it makes me happy too. I enjoy it.
Hello.
Manus Campbell, a retired New Jersey state trooper, is redirecting his pension and veterans' disability payments to support special needs children at this daycare center near Hoi An.
When I learned that for $60 a month, I can bring a child out of his home where he's basically in bed or on the floor watching TV all day, bring him to a school where he can interact with his own peers, he can realize that he's not alone in life, that there are other people just like him, and he can develop friends. There's a lot of people that are here for just the cheap beer, and the pretty women. But for me, it's about the war. And if I can make a small difference, we really want to do something about what we did here.
The Da Nang International Airport, formerly the Da Nang Air Base, remains as one of the largest and most toxic Agent Orange sites in Vietnam, with contamination levels 350 times international safety standards.
We spent $100 million to remediate this. We built a state-of-the-art facility. I'll speak very briefly.
Senator Patrick Leahy is a longtime advocate of funding NGOs helping Vietnam deal with these lethal legacies. He was in Da Nang last year for the inauguration of this 3-story oven-like building designed to cook the dioxin out of the soil, the dangerous compound which has been contaminating the local water and food chain. The U.S. has never agreed to pay Vietnam reparations or the $3 billion in reconstruction funds President Nixon promised during the Paris Peace Accords that ended the American involvement in Vietnam in 1973.
Here we have both a moral and a humanitarian reason to be involved. It's in our long-term best interest to help bring about stability in Vietnam and help Vietnam recover from the ravages of war that never should have occurred.
Da Nang's thatch roof huts and single-story buildings I remember from the war have long since been replaced by one of Vietnam's most progressive metropolises and a new generation of Vietnamese who make little, if any, reference to the war. The beaches where the Marines originally landed are now experiencing a new wave of foreign and domestic investors as a result of its booming economy since the trade embargoes were lifted. What's left of the old Marine helicopter base near Marble Mountain is just across the road from a mega Chinese gambling casino.
Do you really feel accepted here now? I mean, do they know that you were here during the war?
They do. Yeah, they do. There's no animosity, no friction at all. They've all welcomed me with open arms. They invite me to their home. We drink beer together, and I feel very comfortable and very much part of the community here.
There's no enemy here anymore. These people don't care about the war. When you talk about the war, they say, forget it. They don't want to talk about it because they want to live for today. It's because of my relationship with Vietnam in the past and what happened to me as a 19-year-old during the war shaped my life to the point where I came back here to do something good for the people.
For the PBS NewsHour, Mike Suray reporting from Da Nang, Vietnam.
You'll find information about all the resources discussed on our show tonight on our website or by calling the Veterans Service Office. Veterans in Foreign Wars are holding 2 youth essay competitions on patriotism. A cash prize of $5,000 and a scholarship of $30,000 can be won. The deadline on both of those essays is November 1st, and more information can be found at vfw.org. Tonight, we feature an interview with Jana Hon from the Vietnam Veteran Memorial Fund, who is trying to find photos of every name on the Vietnam Wall in Washington. To help with her goal, go to the website on your screen. Vietnam Veterans of America is dedicated to Vietnam-era veterans and their families. Their website is filled with helpful resources. Go to vva.org. Tonight, we discuss the efforts of the Wheelchair Foundation. They can be found at wheelchairfoundation.org. The VA gives free health exams for eligible veterans who are exposed to Agent Orange during their military service. For more information, go to the link on your screen. We'd like to direct you to the Contra Costa Veteran Service Office, which is a great overall resource for veterans and their families in Contra Costa County.
Veterans Day is coming up next month. There are several events going on, plenty of activities in almost every community. Here are a few that might be of interest to you. And remember, visit our website for a full list of veterans events and resources. Next Tuesday, October 27th, we present our first About Face workshop. This free painting workshop is offered to all veterans. No previous art experience is necessary. It's not too late to register. Go to ac5.org or call 925-646-2278. This is a great opportunity to try something new. Bring your friends and sign up today. Saturday, November 7th, a special Honoring Our Veterans event will be held at the Danville Veterans Memorial Building from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. For more information, go to vmbrsv.org. On November 10th at 11 a.m., the Contra Costa County Board of Supervisors will be hosting a special Veterans Day ceremony at the board chambers located at 651 Pine Street in Martinez. On November 11th, the City Concord will be hosting a Veterans Day ceremony and softball tournament. The activities start at 11 a.m. Also, on November 11th, San Ramon Valley will be holding a Veterans Observance starting at 10 a.m. Go to their website, listed on the screen, for more information. Tell a friend where to find tonight's episode. We replay our shows Monday nights at 7 p.m., Wednesday nights at 11, and Saturdays at 9 a.m. You can watch all past episodes anytime on our website, contracostatv.org/Veterans Voices. Before we sign off tonight, I'd like to read to you a passage from Mekong First Light, written by our local author and veteran, Joseph Calloway. My Vietnam friends never grow old as we do. I remember them so vividly, I could almost reach out and touch them. I want to forget the Vietnam events, but I never want to forget these soldiers. Their blood will never dry. Their courage and sacrifice represent the indomitable spirit of humanity and its will to struggle against all odds in the worst condition. I want to thank all of our guests tonight. I want to thank our Vietnam veterans. Welcome home. Mike, John, Jim, Steve, thank you all to the Veterans Voices production crew. And this is Veterans Voices of Contra Costa wishing you all a good evening. Thank you for serving.